Welcome back, everybody. Today we have the great pleasure to have back with us Jeff Halper, Israeli-American anthropologist, political activist, author of several books on the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. He has lived in Israel since 1973. He's the director of the Israeli Committee Against the House Demolition, and he has always been a sustainer of the one-state solution. We had an interview together about 5-6 months ago. So thank you, Jeff, and welcome back to OTTOLINATV.
Thanks for having me.
So we'd like to ask you firstly, what is the situation inside Israel right now?
Well, everybody's down, obviously. You know, in Israel, everybody's focused on the hostages. It isn't. They don't relate to the bigger issue. Iran is Iran. Everything is simplistic. Iran's Iran. It's bad. We should attack it. Hisbah obviously is bad, so it's good that we're attacking it. Gaza, Hamas is bad, so we're attacking it. There's no analysis. There's no issues. So everything in Israel is boiled down to two things. One is security, you know, and that's the box in which you put Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, whoever. That's secure, and that takes care of everything else. That eliminates any real issues or discussions. So that's background. And then the real issue, of course, is the hostages. October 7th, we had the almost a celebration the other day. It's not in a happy sense, but in the sense of, you know, everything begins with October 7th, which is very important for the Israeli narrative because, you know, you have to portray Hamas and the Palestinian resistance in a criminal way as terrorists. And so you can't allow any context. You can't allow 16 years of a siege of Gaza. You can't allow occupation. You can't allow Zionism, settler colonialism. You know, the fact that 80% of the people in Gaza are refugees from the same places that they attacked. I mean, all that it has to be eliminated. And so then everything gets reduced to the issue of hostages. So that's what Israelis are concerned about. And they're all, of course, depressed because there is no agreement. Netanyahu really is not hurrying to resolve that issue. And, you know, all the stories, that's what's on TV all the time, are the stories of what happened in the music festival or what happened in the kibbutzim and so on. And then there are hostages and the mother is on and the fiance's on and the kids are, you know, and that's what fills up everything. That fills the whole space in a way. So it's very, let me just say, it's very apolitical or non-political. And it all has to do with the hostages. And then everything else is the bad guys.
Yes, it seems to watch the Italian television is the actual same definition that I would use to define the actual propaganda also in all the Western countries. I mean, it's a bit the same also reading the newspapers here, and but it's very interesting how they actually are capable to do that. I mean, still we are talking about countries also in Israel where there's still a kind of freedom of speech and expressions, of course, with all the structural limits. But I think it's very sociologically interesting how, despite that, they are capable to create this kind of bubble and this ability to create this kind of narrative propaganda, as we were in countries where there are no other perspectives beside the official one. I think it's interesting, and so it's even interesting about the Israeli situation because they live this kind of things in their in their skin. So
that's look, in Italy and other countries, obviously, where the government influenced the media, if not government media, and the corporate media, all present. You're right. I mean, all present this certain narrative, and that everybody, that becomes the information you get. That so that very few people actually spend the time researching or finding out what's really happening. People live their lives, and that it provides them with enough information and enough symbolism and enough meaning and nationalism or religion or whatever that okay, they get along with their lives like that. But in Israel, you have another layer, of course, and that is the colonial layer. Israel is a settler colonial state. It came out of Zionism, and that meant that there was a process in which Jews came from Europe with the intention of taking over Palestine. They took over Palestine, they conquered it, they took all the land, they drove out half the Palestinian population, they confined the other half to small little enclaves in a kind of an apartheid situation. Now, that, of course, invites resistance. I mean, no people will voluntarily be displaced and dispossessed and eliminated, erased. And that's why I said before then that, the trick is that you, on the one hand, you criminalize the resistance. But the big point is you have to normalize things. You see, in Italy, you might be manipulated by the media, but there is a normal life. I mean, nobody's saying Italy shouldn't be there, or, this part of Italy should go back to Austria and this part should go back to France. And, you have that kind of, so, there, and so you do, there isn't that sense of defensiveness. Here, defensiveness and is built into the settler colonial project because you don't know, you feel that you're in somebody else's country. And, as much as you criminalize them, there is resistance. I mean, there's fighting, for the last 100 and some years. And you're taking lands, and you're demolishing homes, and you're demolishing olive groves, and you're building settlements. I mean, there's an intention here of and you talk about it, conquering the land of Israel. That's an expression we use. Conquering Jerusalem. Joshua conquered Canaan in the Bible. I mean, we use those kinds of terms. So in a way, there's a sort of an understanding that we're not the native population, even though we make that claim. And so you can never really just sit down and relax and be normal. You always have to look over your shoulder because there's always that resistance, and so what you need then to create at least this modicum of normalcy is a very strong national narrative. You see, you don't need that in Italy so much. I mean, you've got Garibaldi and you've got, but it's not that big a deal. It's kind of ancient history for most. I don't know if the young generation even know those names. But here, you need all the time to mobilize that narrative. You can't allow, people just can't become normal. They can't just go and live their lives because, because you've always got to be defending and protecting and advancing, even in the international community, the Zionist idea that, yes, we should be here. We have a right to be here. And we have a right to defend ourselves, as Biden would say, against terrorism. And so in order to maintain that, you have this strong national narrative that says, yes, this is the land of Israel. It comes from the Bible. We're biblical people. We're coming home. It's all an invented, constructed narrative, of course, but it makes sense to people. Because most people aren't intellectuals. They're not going to go do research, not historians. And it's good enough for them. And we're in our country and we're defending ourselves against terrorists. And there are no Palestinians. They've never figured in. So you have that, and so that what that narrative does then, like I'm saying, more than it would in a country like Italy, is it creates that bubble. That's what creates that bubble, right? That allows you to live with what you're doing. And in some ways, I even sometimes think that Israelis are almost like tourists in their own country. Because what the narrative does, of course, is it excludes everything you don't want to know about. For example, the Nakba. It's against the law to teach the Nakba in Israeli public schools. Well, so take that out of the equation, and what sense of history do you have? So Israelis are like tourists in the sense that they have no context, they have no history, they have no idea what they've done over the years, what Palestine was like 100 years ago, Palestinians. We don't talk about Palestinians even. We talk about Arabs. Even the language has been cleaned up, and we knew they were Arabs here, and they lived in villages somewhere, and the land was undeveloped, and all that. You've got that whole myth and that whole narrative, and that's what Israelis cling to, you see, and they don't allow any challenges to it, and so in a sense they're here, and they're living their lives within this bubble that has nothing to do with the reality of the region or the history or what they've done themselves. There's no accountability because we've never done anything bad. You see, we're the victims. And part of the problem of the Palestinians, of course, and Edward Said talked about that, he called the Palestinians the victims of the victims. So that, that adds to the criminalization, because in the eyes of the world, especially Europe, the Jews are the ultimate victims in the Holocaust, and so what happens when the victims become the oppressors, right? But they fight very hard to keep the image that we're the victims, you see? So if you say Israelis are oppressors, that's anti-Semitism. So that keeps you in line in Italy, right? So Jews become the victims. Well, what happens when you attack a victim? So when the Palestinians are attacking victims, it's terrible. It's awful. It's how could they do that to Jews that are just, trying to find a safe place, and so it really demonizes the Palestinians, and so you can't talk about resistance, because how can you resist victims? So the fact that Israel in this narrative, and of course in the public consciousness because of the Holocaust, has kind of captured that victim space where we're the victims, that allows us to repel any kind of resistance, criticism, or whatever, and also to justify to ourselves that we're doing the right things, that, all right, maybe sometimes bad things happen to Arabs, like what's happening in Gaza, even though you don't see what's happening in Gaza on Israeli TV, but somehow it's in the back. But what can you do? It's, they're the victims of Hamas. They brought it on themselves. We want peace. They refused peace, all these kinds of things. So that's the thing. The narrative is very strong. It's very defensive. It's very airtight. It's self-contained. And it's able to absorb anything that happens. Anything that happens, you can plug into it. So there's no questioning. There's no criticism. There's nothing that's dissonant is allowed to come in. And that's how Israelis kind of reconcile, their lives as settlers, colonialists, doing terrible things to the native population, and nevertheless seeing themselves as victims and good and normal and democratic and European,
Right. But this is they are able to do that also because the conflicts and the actual war is still not impacting so much on the life of the average Israeli people.
That's right.
Because we also hear about a deep economic crisis that is inevitable. United States try to support, of course, also economically, but maybe the rockets are not so periodic, and the crisis is not so deep that this bubble can be destroyed right now. Do you think?
Yeah, look, the bubble has its strength. Bubbles are kind of strong. Tensile strength, it's called in English, and so the Israeli bubble does as well, and so when, for example, the last week we had the attack from Iran, right here in Jerusalem. I mean, missiles were coming over Jerusalem. We looked outside. I mean, I didn't go to the shelter. We looked outside, and you see all the lights, the interceptors, and everything else. Why did I even do that? Why didn't I go into a shelter? 180 missiles were thrown at, ballistic missiles, some of them, because I live in the bubble too. And the bubble is defended by the Iron Dome system, what's called the David Sling air defense system, which is a higher level of defense. There are multiple layers of air defense against missiles. And they're so good. I mean, I have to say, technologically, they're so effective. And then, of course, you've got the Jordanians intercepting, and you've got the Americans intercepting Iranian missiles as well. So you've got all those sorts, and those that do get to Israel then are intercepted by the Israeli system. So the bubble has a meaning. It's pretty strong. So Israelis aren't afraid of that. See, they want to go after Iran, because they know that Iran can't afford a war and can't really break through. So they feel that sense of security in a way. And I think that carries over to things like the economy. Okay, the economy is having problems. It's true. The credit rating has been lowered by the different financial institutions of the world. There's obviously less investment here. With the war going on, and BDS is having some effect. We are getting to a point like South Africa where corporations don't really want to be associated with Israel. I mean, they're beginning to pay a price in terms of their own client base and so on. So that is something, but Israelis feel, well, this is just transitory. It'll pass. Once this whole thing passes, we'll go back to what we were, because, and they have a point, the Israeli economy is kind of boycott immune. In other words, it's based on high tech. So high tech is, it's not always public. And of course, a lot of the high tech is connected to the military. And Israel has a very strong military. I wrote a book about this called War Against the People, that's related to, and don't forget, it's not only a matter of like Israel's a client of the United States or even of Europe. Israel's one of the major arms supplier to China. Israel's the number 2 arms supplier to India. So when you look at the BRICS countries, except for South Africa, if you look at the BRICS that are supposed to be the alternative to the global north, Israel, using what I call its security politics or security diplomacy based on, we can deliver for you. You need weapon systems, we can deliver. You need surveillance for your population, the Uyghurs, we can deliver. You need police repression, population control, like we've learned on the Palestinians, to support your own repressive regime, Saudi Arabia, we can deliver. You need to train your police in Italy, we can deliver. You see, and so in a way, I think Israelis feel that their economy is kind of can only be hurt to a certain degree, and all that will come back because the military is the military. It doesn't have ups and downs. It only has ups. And then if you put into that, of course, tourism, so the Christians will come back. I think Israelis see this as a downturn. They don't see this as a major threat to the Israeli economy or Israel itself in a way. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, when you're coming, if Israelis were more afraid, then there might be more of an opening to try to deal with everything. But because we're really immune, got the United States, NATO behind us, this whole Iron Dome system, a military, if everywhere you turn, you're protected. So what the hell? We could do anything we want to do. There's no constraints on us. And you can you can defy Biden. Biden said, don't go into Rafah.
Mm-hmm.
Biden said, don't hurt Lebanon. Biden said, don't, Israel with Iran, Israel do anything it wants to do, because in the end, it feels that the world needs it, more than the other way around. The United States needs it. Israel's strength is in Congress, bipartisan, both parties. It isn't with the president. Doesn't matter who the president is. And if, the United States and NATO get tired of us, Israel could easily shift to China and the BRICS and probably be welcomed. I mean, the BRICS welcome Saudi Arabia. Why wouldn't they welcome Israel? You see, so Israelis have that essential sense of security, so that if there's downturns here and there, it doesn't really affect their policy or their ways of looking at things.
Right. And another question about what's going on inside Israel is about the West Bank. If you have more details about what's going on there, and also about the Arab minority that lives in Israel. How is living this situation?
Well, all right. Let me do a big picture thing again and go back to settler colonialism. I mean, that sounds academic, but you don't understand what's going on if you don't understand Zionism as a settler colonial project. That means something. There's a logic to it. There's a dynamic to it. There are things that settler colonial projects all over the world do that Israel is doing. And part of it is we have to begin to adopt an anti-colonial language. So, for example, I don't use the word conflict. It's not a conflict. I mean, a conflict is between two sides. So the minute you talk about conflict, now you're legitimizing a colonial movement as a legitimate side. And now the whole thing becomes negotiations and compromise, and the Palestinians are lost. So instead of conflict, we try to talk about, that this is a Palestinian struggle, or its resistance against a settler colonial project. So I think even the framing becomes really important in order to understand the logic of it, so that this is a settler colonial project intended, again, to transform an Arab country into a Jewish country, to transform Palestine into Israel. Now, once you understand that and take the land, of course, and then you have to displace the population, because you can't do that. Genocide is built into settler colonialism. It isn't a byproduct, or it's built in, because how do you transform an Arab country into a Jewish country without genocide? If not physical genocide, because you can drive the people out or confine them, at least cultural genocide, where you erase them as a people, as a historic presence. And now, having said that, the key issue here is normalization. The way a settler colonial project wins in the end is it becomes normal. And that's the danger with Israel. Israel's a normal place. Israelis are always saying, and Biden is always saying, Israel's a normal country. It has a right to defend itself, but it's basically a part of the UN. It's a part of, it's a kind of in the neighborhood of NATO, and that's where Israel wins. So if you go to your travel agent in Firenze and you say, I want to buy a ticket to Palestine, good luck. There's no Palestine. There's no airport. There's no airline. If you say, I want to go visit a church in Bethlehem, which is in the West Bank, it's not inside Israel, it's in the West Bank, you have to buy a ticket to Israel. See, so it becomes self-evident and obvious and normal that this is all Israel, from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River, from the river to the sea. and that's where it all succeeds. And look at the language. What Biden is pushing now, and he said this from the day after October 7th, is that we have to get back to the process of normalization, the word he uses, between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Israel made peace with Jordan and Egypt. Under Trump, you had the Abrahamic Accords with the Gulf states and Oman and Bahrain and Sudan even, and Morocco. Now the crown, the jewel in the crown is Saudi Arabia. We get that, and it's so that's where the international community in Israel are going. Now, what happens if it's normalization? Normalization means then the status quo today is the status quo. So Israel is, you're asking about the West Bank and inside Israel for Palestinians. Israel is in a mopping up process. It knows that when the fighting in Gaza dies down, so now you're talking about 3, 4, 5, 6 months. All right, the new administration is going to come in the United States, so maybe we're talking about 9 months, whatever. In the fairly close future, we're going back to normalization. Okay, now we have a window of a number of months in which we have to clear the land completely. We have to do everything we wanted to do to finish the Zionist project and create this apartheid reality that will then be normalized. And
so that's the plan. That's the plan. Do you think that's the plan? So Netanyahu wants to get rid of Hamas and Hezbollah. That's the main plan, and Iran will see. That's the. Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Hezbollah is even less important in a way. Hezbollah, threw missiles. I mean, Israel really, if they just shut up and stay on the other side of the Litani River, Israel doesn't care about Hezbollah. And in a way, Hezbollah is intended as a front line of Iran. Palestine isn't the main issue for Iran and Hezbollah. Hamas is in other words, for what's happening now to again pave the way for normalization is Israel's destroying the last vestiges of Palestinian resistance. Hamas, you have really mini Gazas in the northern West Bank, into the Jenin refugee camp, the Tulkarm refugee camp, and other communities in the north where you still have resistance. Israel's using all the military equipment it's using in Gaza, from drones to fighter. I mean, an F-35 just hit the Jenin refugee camp the other day, and troops and shock troops and everything, so that's a part of it. But the other part of the normalization is, again, clearing the land of the West Bank. And that's where you have in what's called Area C, which is the Israeli-controlled part of the West Bank, 60% of the West Bank, where the settlements are. That's where Israel has unleashed its soldiers and violent settlers. These violent settlers that we call the Hilltop Youth. I mean, they're like, if you remember Clockwork Orange, these kinds of almost automatons, robotic, cruel, inhuman beings, kind of, it's taken them into the Israeli army. There's a new unit called Desert Frontier, which is a unit of the most violent settler youth. And so they're unleashing them on the Palestinian shepherds, especially shepherds and farmers in the West Bank. Why? I mean, there's a little encampment. It's not much, not many people. Drive them out. But that little encampment has hundreds of acres of land that's grazing land and farmland. So if you eliminate that node, that little enclave, you really have taken over a huge chunk of the West Bank. And there's been 26 entire Palestinian communities that have been abandoned because of the attacks of the settlers and the army. So that's what I'm saying. On the West Bank, Israel is clearing, is simply mopping up in anticipation of normalization. And once there's normalization, what we have is Israel as an apartheid regime. It has to be apartheid. You can't, because you can't give the Palestinians, who are half the population of this country, citizenship. So you have to lock them into a Bantustan, a number of enclaves on 10% of the country. Israel takes 90%, which is just about what white South Africa took. And the Bantustans were 10 or 11% of South Africa. So it's the same proportion. And then that greater Israel, controlling 90% of Palestine between the river and the sea, normalizes with Saudi Arabia. And once that happens, you normalize with the international community. And where are the Palestinians? They're gone. They're erased. There is no Palestinian issue. There is no more conflict, if you want to even use that term. It's done. And that is how Israel wins. That's how settler colonialism wins, is through normalization. So it's not a very sexy term. It's something hard to resist. It's hard to mobilize people around. But it's this process of normalization that is the most significant thing happening. And that's happening on the West Bank, more than in Gaza. Gaza is more dramatic, but the West Bank is more significant politically from the normalization process. And then, just to finish this up, inside Israel, you have tremendous suppression of Palestinians. The Palestinians, citizens of Israel, are this much better off than in the West Bank today, because Israel again is in the last stages of asserting that this entire country is Jewish. And it's saying to the, I'll end on this, it's saying to the Palestinians, you have three choices. You have three choices. You can submit. And that's what they're saying to the Palestinians inside Israel. You're here, you're Israeli citizens, submit. Forget resistance, forget about being Palestinians. You're Israeli Arabs. No national identity. You're equal citizens, sort of, but in a Jewish state. Submit. And if the West Bank submits in that way, okay. Okay. If you don't want to submit, leave. That's number two. Get out. You're in a prison, especially the West Bank is a prison. You're in a prison, but the back door is open. Get out. Go to Jordan. From Jordan, go anywhere you want to go. Get out. So submit, leave, or die. And that's the message of Gaza. You die. If you're not going to submit and you're not going to leave, or you can't leave, you die. And so genocide, what we call genocide, has a very important meaning inside Israel. This is the message to Palestinians. If you don't submit to us, you're going to die. And that, I think, is just as relevant for Palestinians inside Israel as it is for Palestinians in the occupied territory.
Right. Last question. I'd like to ask you is more geopolitical, because you told to us you told us about the perception, the inside perception. You told us about the situation in the West Bank, but of course this war has also a geopolitical meaning. Inside there is somebody calls it the new Cold War. Somebody else called the Third World War in pieces, and so on. And we are also seeing in some way that the two main fronts of this war, of this global conflict, the European and the Middle East conflict, are always more united in some way, and they are forming always more clearly two different blocks. One block we already knew is the West imperialistic US-led bloc, and the other is the global South in some way, with all the contradiction and so on. In this term and in this picture, what's the meaning of this war? Also because beside the goal of the Israeli states to build a great Israel, there are also looks like they're also trying to have an escalation with Iran. And that's a bit more. That's a bit. It's an even bigger issue that has, of course, a more global repercussion and so on. So, what do you think about this war in this context?
Well, I think Israel's in a very special place because it isn't taking an ideological position. It isn't positioning itself with the West or the global North or the BRICS countries, the global South, or, it's basically says we're the enforcer. See, Israel wants to, one of the principles of Zionism from the very beginning was you have to have a hegemon to support you. Jews I couldn't do this on their own, obviously. So Theodor Herzl, who started Zionism, the movement, 130 years ago, he went to the Sultan in Istanbul to ask for a charter over Palestine. When that didn't happen, he met Kaiser Wilhelm when Wilhelm came to Jerusalem in 1898. Then after World War I, of course, they succeeded in creating a very strong relationship with Britain. So the Balfour Declaration of 1917 was written by Zionists, Chaim Weizmann, and taken word by word and put into the League of Nations mandate that said, Jews will have, the British and the League of Nations, through its mandate, will encourage a Jewish national home in Palestine, but there's no political rights at all for Palestinians in the country. And then, of course, after 1948, you had the French. The French are the ones that gave Israel, the Air Force to fight in the 1956 war with them in Britain against Nasser's Egypt. And then after 1967, you had the U.S. So that's it's not ideology. You need a hegemon. Now, we live in a transactional world. This isn't a world of values that we support you because you're Western and you beloved democracy. It's what do you have to deliver? And in this transactional world, the Palestinians have nothing to deliver. And so that's why they're really marginal and they're not even thought of. Israel has developed from the very beginning this military capacity on the basis of the Palestinian laboratory that it's always had. And so Israel's become the enforcer. It's the enforcer of global capitalism for the United States and Europe. It's the enforcer of repressive regimes that invite its technologies to come in. And again, this crosses lines. It's just as strong in the BRICS countries. Now, it has more of an interest in the West. I mean, the United States gives it, $40 billion every decade, $4.5 billion a year. Well, China's not going to give it. So right now they're there, but they're not there ideologically. And if there's a problem with the U.S., they'll shift easily to China, or they'll be in both camps, which is better, which is where they are today, pretty much. Mm-hmm. So that's the point. Israel has it's not non-aligned in a sense. I mean, it does present itself as part of the West because the West is stronger right now. But I gave you that whole list of hegemons that Zionism linked itself to. The United States is just the last in the line, right, so far. But it could easily be, the German Kaiser, Britain, France, the United States, China. Mm-hmm. There could easily be another stage. And that's, I think, where Israel's strong. Because, like I said, this whole issue of enforcement, whether it's on a global military, Israel has a very pivotal place. It's very skilled and it has the technologies for conventional warfare. The F-35, Israel could never produce an F-35, this cutting edge stealth bomber aircraft. But a lot of the cockpit, the software of the F-35 is Israeli, the navigating systems, the targeting systems, those sorts of things. So it's and it's skilled. It can integrate F-35s into it. In most countries, if you gave France the F-35, I don't know if they would be so capable of integrating it into their military. Israel's capable of doing that. So it has a strong conventional military, but at the same time, it's good at war against the people. And in this capitalist system, wars are not between states anymore. Wars are really against us, against the people. And that's where the surveillance comes in, all the technologies of repression that Israel's developed, population control in the Palestinians, and that goes to every country, whether it's China or Brazil or Swaziland. I don't care if you're East, West, communist, religious, I don't care who you are. You want Israeli surveillance and population control technologies, and that's where I think Israel fits in. And from that point of view, again, that's part of the bubble. That's what protects us, because there is. Look at it. Just look at what's happening, and even with the fight with Iran. I mean, China is very close to Iran. I mean, China doesn't have oil. A lot of its oil comes from Iran. Where is China? Have you heard anything from China? India, which is next to Iran, is supporting Israel. Modi loves Israel. You know, this Hindu nationalism developed together with Zionism. They even had the leaders were meeting back in the 1930s and 40s and so on. So that, these big divisions we have of East and West and North and South and all of this, Israel's able to really bridge all of those things, and I think that's where its strength comes in.
Right. Thank you very much, Jeff, for your lucid and very interesting analysis. I hope we'll have other occasion to talk. So thank you very much again. Thank you everybody for listening to us, and see you to the next episode. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.